The CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Australian telco Optus suffers a massive data breach. Uber blames lapsus, and is ransomware usage declining? These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Joe Lewis, a director of cyber assessment strategy at the U.S. Department of Energy. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
And just a reminder, everybody, Joe is lending us his personal insight, opinion, and expertise. These are not the opinions of the U.S. Department of Energy. Before we move on, we want to thank also our sponsor, SixClicks, AI-powered integrated content, risk and compliance reimagined. You can join us on YouTube Live. Just go to CISOSeries.com, hit the events dropdown, then look for the cybersecurity headlines week in review image. It's the third one down. You can count your smart people. Just click on it to join us. We can't wait to have you here. We've got about 20 minutes though, so let's just dive right in. We got a block of stories that I feel are all unified here, Joe. So let's string these pins on a pegboard together. I lost the metaphor here. First up, Australian telco Optus suffers a massive data breach. Australia's second largest telco, Optus, has suffered a massive data breach with the personal information of potentially millions of customers compromised by a malicious cyber attack. It's believed the attackers were working for a criminal or state-sponsored organization and made off with birth dates, phone numbers, email addresses, driver's licenses, and passport numbers. Optus stated yesterday that they could not yet say how many of its 9.7 million subscribers in Australia had been compromised, but did say the number was, quote, significant. They added, "We're so deeply disappointed because we spend so much time and we invest so much in preventing this from occurring." So, Joe, a lot of issues within this story. One being the fact that the stolen data includes verification records that go back 6 years, and this is in accordance with Australian law. So you have like a big tail of information, not just kind of an immediate blast radius. Telcos in many countries have suffered outages and attacks, and they occupy a special space since they hold a direct connection with the general public. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about this story?
Well, first and foremost, I think, I agree with you. There are a lot of issues to unpack here. First and foremost, I think the thought that comes to mind is that this highlights how privacy and the protection of data is really becoming an illusion, right? It's no longer a matter of if you're going to get your data breached. It's a matter of when, by whom, and how bad is it going to be for you, right? There are indications even that in the market that consumers are not punishing firms for data breaches, right? I think our primary mechanism by which we vote, right, is to take our business elsewhere, and there's no indication from the market that that's what's taking place. And so I think customers are becoming desensitized to the idea that their data is getting breached. And so this is 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, a la Paula Abdul on VH1. But sorry, go ahead.
Well, and for anyone that outside of the CISO space, anyone that is dismayed whenever they see a big breach, I was just like, just go to "Have I Been Pwned" and put in one of your emails. Like, we've reached the saturation point where you're in there somewhere. Someone has something. You've been included in something at this point, right?
Absolutely. And again, I think consumers are desensitized, and that's bad for us, right? That's bad for us for a number of reasons. But really, there seems to be less of an inclination on the parts of the organizations, other than the monetary protection of their own data, to protect consumer data. And so that's an interesting place for us to find ourselves in as consumers of their services.
For sure. And we will see if when we know more about the specifics of the damages here, we'll follow up on cybersecurity headlines. So make sure you check in daily for that. Our next story here, Uber says there's no evidence that users' private information was compromised. We've got a double story here. There's a little bit of a follow-on to this, so let's just jump into it. Our headline on Monday, and since then, Uber has blamed Lapsus for the hack, a group that targets high-profile tech companies, and has breached Microsoft, Cisco, Samsung, NVIDIA, and Okta this year alone. It would be a greatest hits for anybody, right? The attack was an MFA exploit. An 18-year-old hacker, allegedly the same one who broke into Rockstar Games, basically bullied the compromised phone of an Uber contractor until the contractor let him in. And the reason this pairs well is we just have this story about MFA fatigue, and that's being an increasingly common tactic for high-profile breaches. This is when a threat actor runs a script that attempts to log in with stolen credentials over and over and over again, causing a repeated stream of MFA push notifications to be sent to the account of an owner's mobile device. The goal is to keep this up to the point that the employee simply presses OK at some point just to make it stop. If that doesn't work, the threat actor could make contact through voice or email, imploring the user to accept the request, even posing as IT to add, further fuel to the fire. So, Joe, I mean, in the case of Uber and many others, we're seeing 2FA being overcome just by sheer persistence and just, the social aspect of bullying other human beings in one form or another, kind of like horror movies where a person gets taken down by a swarm of ants over time. How would you be preparing employees to deal with something like MFA fatigue?
Well, so first and foremost, I think it's important to note that the common factor in all of this is the human, right? These attackers are taking advantage of the human element, which is the hardest to protect against, right? So the I think the corporate answer is training and awareness, right? And I think even that is a tough sell, because now it's become an exercise that gets done because you're required to do it annually, and people are not maybe getting what they need out of it. But training and awareness is definitely one of the things. But I think we also just need to be focusing on creating a culture of security. And I think that's really ultimately what it's going to take. When you empower the individual employee to be a cyber professional in an organization, they take ownership of this as a challenge. And I think that is what it will take for somebody to look at this and say, this is a problem that I've gotten 25 unsolicited MFA notifications. Perhaps I need to do something about this rather than click OK.
Yeah, and I think paired with that also, that does also seem like an insider threat kind of thing where that should be triggering alarm bells in and of itself.
Agreed.
Now, I know sometimes those systems, those MFA systems maybe are separate third-party authenticators or something like that, so they may not be integrated depending on how your MFA is set up. But to me, that in and of itself should be triggering something.
Sure. And, one of the things that I think it's important to note is roles and responsibilities need to be clearly identified, because as a consumer of an MFA type of service, one of the expectations I would have is that there would be limitations to the number of unsuccessful attempts before some sort of security trigger takes place. And so, am I blaming the MFA provider? Probably not. But do they have some culpability? Potentially, right? I mean, this seems like a significant design challenge that could be rectified relatively simply.
All right, well, our next story here, Gym phone thefts reveal significant 2FA flaw. Do you sense the theme here? It's been a bad week for 2FA, let's just face it. In this story, 2FA or MFA takes a hit from a different direction, and one that seems surprisingly easy. A rash of thefts have seen phones and bank cards being stolen from gym lockers. Once the thieves have the phone and the cards, they then register the bank card through a relevant banking app using their own phone or computer. Since it's the first time that the card has been used on a new device, a one-off security passcode is demanded. That verification passcode is sent by the bank to the victim's stolen phone, which flashes up on a lock screen, allowing the thief to enter it to their own device. Once accepted, it's game over. They have full control over that bank account. So, Joe, I mean, in this case, a thief being in possession of both items, all the keys to the kingdom there, which can, happen through purse snatching, good old fashioned stick up, or just a visit to the gym, evidently. The weak point becomes the notification on the phone's lock screen. This appears to be a clear Maginot line in smartphone security. I'm curious, what suggestions do you have to resolve this, and who would be responsible here? I guess the customer, phone manufacturer, the bank, or is it, in this case, a theft. Obviously, the thief is to blame, right? But where can we best shore up security, I guess?
So I think smartphone manufacturers are the rightful place to start there. I think Apple is doing some really interesting things with iOS lately. I don't know if you've noticed, iOS 16 now requires Face ID for things like viewing deleted photos and hidden photos. And that's an indication that they recognize that cybersecurity is not something that's on the forefront of everybody's mind whenever they're buying a smartphone. But I think that is the logical place to start. I think some security measures need to be on by default, and certainly with the option to turn them off. But I think that would go a long way towards preventing these types of MFA attacks, because they wouldn't have the ability to see the notification whenever it hit the screen.
Yeah, this perked up my ears because I think for the last 2 or 3 iOS releases, they've had it where you can have your messages. It just gives a generic notification, doesn't give you the contents of that, even when your phone is locked. So, and I'm assuming Android has something similar to that. So, probably a good idea to turn that on if you haven't already. I know it's a speed bump though, right? It's that constant security versus convenience kind of spectrum that we're always talking about, right?
Absolutely. And really, again, what we're hoping to do is just slow them down to the point where they'll go look for easier targets. This is a successful attack because this feature is not turned on, right? So
Yeah.
it is an easy to accomplish attack. So I think, putting that small barrier in place is probably worth looking at from an enterprise perspective.
All right. Well, let's spend a few moments now with our sponsor, SixClicks. SixClicks is your AI-powered GRC platform featuring a fully integrated content library. SixClicks provides organizations with a powerful GRC platform to build highly scalable risk and compliance functions, and advisors with the tools to streamline and scale their services, saving everyone enormous time and money. Reimagine risk, improve cybersecurity, demonstrate compliance. For more information, visit sixclicks.com/CISO Series. Visit them at the number 6, CLICKS.com. All right, our next story here, the shifting ways of Chrome Loader. Microsoft and VMware have warned of an ongoing malware campaign using Chrome Loader. Researchers observed this dropping malicious browser extensions, Node WebKit malware, and ransomware. This isn't extremely new. Red Canary researchers warned of an uptick in attack traffic from a Chrome Loader in Q1 2022, which I have to remind myself is 6 months ago now. This shows a change of pace, though, for the malware. It initially redirected traffic to advertising sites for click fraud. Palo Alto Networks reported that it evolved into an info stealer in July, with the most current strain coming from ISO files being sent through malicious ads, browser redirects, and YouTube video comments. Another kind of ongoing trend we've seen, the ISO file becoming the Fisher's weapon of choice here. Researchers note that since it started as adware, Chrome Loader didn't appear on a lot of analysts' radar until it escalated into a more capable threat. So, Joe, this demonstrates two lowbrow approaches to maybe getting into a system, adware and YouTube video comments, falling once again into the idea that when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. What can be done to allow security teams to be as creative in terms of identifying new threats, or do you feel like we're already have a process to kind of handle these things as they crop up?
Well, I got to say that security analysts are the unsung heroes of our industry, right? Because they're out there every day, hooking and jabbing, trying to keep us safe. But the fact is, you can't really keep up. And I think we're in an industry, we're in an environment where things rapidly evolve, and being on that bleeding edge has its benefits and its downsides. And so, there's always the discussion between, how much time and effort do you spend and money do you spend protecting an asset, only for the threat to either never materialize or potentially, right? So I don't know. I say that to say I think our analysts are doing a bang up job, and I think when you more to the point, this really brings up that evolution and how quickly things evolve, and our nature and our ability to be adaptive in that environment is going to be huge and critical to the future success.
Yeah, and in this case, I don't even know if it was opportunistic in, if you're developing Chrome Loader. I think it seems like, based on the evidence, that this was adding functionality as a software development process over time, not even necessarily like, hey, we're going to sneak in under the radar. It just accidentally happened to be a really effective way to target a blind spot, maybe with how analysts are looking at things. So that to me is the most interesting part of this, right, is kind of finding that, not even a blind spot, but just the kind of where there's a little less overlap in how these things are handled.
Sure. And again, these guys are on the front lines all day long,
Yeah.
and they already have a really wide berth of things that they're trying to cover. So I think they're doing the best they can. We just need to be as adaptive and as agile as we can be.
Absolutely. All right, our next story here, ransomware attacks fall in the first half. That's according to a new report from the Cyber Insurer Coalition. They say ransomware attack frequency and cost fell from the second half of 2021 to the first half of 2022. Average ransomware payment demands fell 35% in that time to $896,000. In the first half, Lockbit was the most commonly claimed ransomware strain, at representing 12% of claims. Lauren's ransomware accounted for the highest ransom demand on average at $3.5 million. While ransomware has had a bit of a down 2022, I'm sure a lot of people are shedding tears with that, phishing did see an uptick. Insurance claims citing phishing accounted for 60% of all claims, up from 32% in 2021. So, just Joe, I'm curious, what are your thoughts as to possible reasons for the drop? Are we talking better protection response, too many criminals, just the fallout from the kind of decline of Conti? I'm curious, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a lot of things. I think the government and especially the FBI being very, very vocal about not encouraging folks to pay ransoms, I think is finally starting to bear some fruit.
Hmm.
These attacks are so successful because people continue to pay the ransom, right?
Yeah.
I think the focus on this as a topical area has been great, and I think now more focus and attention is being paid on incident response and disaster recovery in ways that maybe they don't have to pay the ransom. But I think it's interesting to note that there's already some new data that's indicating that we're seeing a significant uptick in the back half of 2022. And I know that the recent escalations in Russia and their call up of 300,000 reservists, we are bracing for another uptick in these things because the expectation is that that will become a part of this kinetic conflict as well.
All right, our next story here. Revolut confirms cyber attack exposed user data. This is a British financial technology company that offers banking services such as currency exchange, debit cards, virtual cards, commission-free stock trading, similar services. It's confirmed that an unauthorized third party accessed data of roughly 50,000 of its customers. According to its breach disclosure, hackers use social engineering to access a database containing partial card payment data and customer PII. They warn that the breach appears to have triggered a phishing campaign. Here we have yet another social engineering attack, which, like the MFA stories we've already covered, exploits human nature to get around physical cyber defenses. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about this attack, or I guess just the dangers of the phishing campaign that followed it?
Well, again, that common thread is the wetware, right? It's the human, and I think we can put a lot of capabilities, tools, and processes in place. But ultimately, if our human element is not trained and not ready to recognize the signs of a challenge, we're always going to be on the reactive. I also want to note that I think it's really interesting that the firm identified the attack right away. They only had like 0.16% of their customer base exposed, and
Mhm.
they reported right away. And I think that indicates a commitment to security that is lacking. I mean, there are several firms where months go by before we learn of a breach that had taken place. And I just wanted to call attention to the fact that at least they did this on the front end as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really makes, instead of just seeing a random phishing campaign and then kind of, reverse engineering what happened, especially for a financial services firm where reputational risk, I'm sure, was factored into, any kind of decision making there. Yeah. Kudos to them for being so quick to turn this around.
Absolutely.
All right, and our last story here. Oh wait, hold on. We have John Gallagher saying, "Buy the dip on ransomware." Yes, sadly, when I have my ransomware futures on the S&P, I will be trading on those for sure. Thank you, John. All right, and our last story here: 15-year-old Python bug causes problems. Who would have knew? Back in 2007, a researcher submitted a path traversal bug in Python's tar file package, letting an attacker potentially overwrite arbitrary files. Since then, the bug has remained open. There was a documentation update warning that was submitted to warn developers about the risk. The bug does not appear to be exploited in the wild, but could impact the software supply chain. A security researcher at Trellix, Charles McFarland, rediscovered the bug. With the help of GitHub, he determined that 588,840 unique repositories include the import tar file function in code, spanning a wide range of industries. McFarland estimates that around 60% of those contain the bug. Trellix released a patch in a forked version of the impacted repository. These types of stories seem to be coming up more regularly. Old software sitting there in legacy systems, just a matter of time before they wreak havoc. In this case, it seems like at the time, the software supply chain wasn't top of mind for everybody, and looking at the reaction to the maintainers, it was just like, it's not that big of a deal. I'm curious, what are your strategies with dealing with these hidden hazards?
Well, I think visibility on your current software is critical, right? I think Center for Internet Security says there's 5 controls that you can put in place that'll mitigate 85% of your risk, and asset visibility and software visibility are the 1 and 2. And so knowing what you have allows you the ability to react more quickly whenever you realize these things are going on. But I think there are some really interesting things going on with software bill of materials. I think putting the onus on the software developers to provide a list of the components is going to be something we're going to see a lot more of. And, these third-party risk assessments are really going to become more prevalent as well, where we say, well, maybe we don't want to do business with you because you don't have a software bill of materials, or maybe you aren't tracking the components that are in place.
Yeah. All excellent points, and I feel bad because I was looking through the change logs on this and looking through to see like how did this just sit here, and in this particular case it really was just like this kind of isn't like this isn't outside. It wasn't like it was software behaving out of bounds or something like that. It was that they didn't see the use case in this particular way of like how devastating. This was before we all had SolarWinds at top of mind. So
Right.
my sympathies to those developers now that are getting brought up 15 years later.
Sure.
Before we get out of here, any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you on today's rundown?
Well, so thumbs up on all of the stories on multi-factor authentication. I think it's important to note that any multi-factor authentication solution you put in place is going to have its own set of challenges, but it is significantly better than having just a username and password type of environment. So I wouldn't take that as a dissuading factor for implementing an MFA solution.
Excellent thing to keep in mind. Well, thank you so much, Joe Lewis, the Director of Cyber Assessment Strategy at the U.S. Department of Energy. Thank you so much for being on the show. Truly was a pleasure. Where can people find you on the cyberspace if they are so inclined?
So I'm on LinkedIn. My custom URL is Joseph Lewis Senior. I am routinely out there communicating with other cyber professionals. So reach out, connect, and I will. I'd love to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. This was just great. We couldn't do this for another hour, so we'll have to have you back on before too long. Thanks also to our sponsor, SixClicks, AI-powered integrated content, risk and compliance reimagined. A reminder to join us next week for a very special Super Cyber Friday. Our topic of discussion will be hacking the CISO Series. We're turning 4 years old. The show will have 14 guests, all the hosts and reporters from the CISO Series podcast, Defense in Depth, and Cybersecurity Headlines, including yours truly. I know that's what everybody wants, is more Rich Stroffolino. This will be followed by the CISO Series 4th anniversary game show and networking meetup and an online party. This will be a great chance to mingle with the hosts and the people who work behind the scenes at the CISO Series. In all seriousness, can't wait for this. Super excited. This will be followed by the Weekend Review show. And in the meantime, you can still get your daily news fix through Cybersecurity Headlines. Every single day, give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until next week, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.